There's a weird world of hyper-specific gods, saints, and deities, and I'd like to start by talking about the best god. And that's not a hot take, just a literal translation of the name of the Greek god Aristaeus, whose name is derived from the Greek word Aristos, meaning best. And it's a bold claim, considering that Greek mythology is full of hundreds of deities, but the logic is pretty sound. Aristaeus was a rustic Renaissance man thousands of years before the actual Renaissance, and this is due in no small part to his godly connections. You could say that Aristaeus was the original Nepo baby. His mother was Cyrene, a huntress and queen, and his father was Apollo, one of the 12 Olympians. When Aristaeus was born, his dad's friend Hermes, who also just happened to be an Olympian, raised him on nectar and ambrosia, while Gaia, the goddess of earth, made him immortal. They say it takes a village to raise a god, and through his family connections, Aristaeus became a patron god and protector of pretty much every rural art. He started out in the family business, following in Apollo's footsteps as the patron god and protector of shepherds. But that wasn't the only skill he picked up at family gatherings. His mom and her sister Artemis taught him how to track, hunt, and trap animals. His father taught him how to heal using medicinal plants. His uncle, Dionysus, taught him how to produce alcohol, and his other uncle, Hephaestus, showed him how to work metal, clay, glass, and wood. And his great-uncle Poseidon taught him how to fish. And the nymphs raising him showed him how to make cream, butter, cheese, and honey. Aristaeus is considered a benevolent god, meaning he was a god of goodwill and good intentions, and honestly, he was probably too busy learning every agricultural skill and practical trade on Earth to get into too much trouble. Well, except for that one time, when he chased Orpheus's wife, Eurydice, causing her to step on a snake that, in turn, killed her. As punishment, all his bees became sick and died. But thanks to his tracking skills and his ability with a knife, he sacrificed a bunch of animals to the gods, and his bees came back. Aristaeus is a humble deity, representing the agricultural everyman who knows how to get their hands dirty. He's a far cry from Poseidon, who ancient Greek mariners would pray to for calm seas. Or even St. Anthony, to whom young Catholic children pray, "Tony, Tony, turn around, something's lost that can't be found," when they lose one of their toys. Some gods aren't household names, celebrated as all-knowing beings. Some of them are just here to help us with the smaller parts of our lives, the parts that eventually add up to the total sum of our life. From sword-seeking hairstylists to pleasure-loving gigolos and even widows on the warpath, there's a god for every dark corner of the world. In today's episode of Weird World, we're gonna explore some of these hyper-specific, unsung spiritual guides. If you're trying to get pregnant, you're gonna spend a lot of time getting busy, but maybe you should spend some time on your knees, praying to Sheela Na Gig, the Celtic deity of fertility. Across Europe, hundreds of churches feature statues of gargoyles spreading open their vulvas. They're called Sheela Na Gigs. It sounds like a Banksy-esque art project, but scholars believe that Sheela Na Gig statues date back to the 11th or 12th century. The exact reason for their existence is unknown. Some art historians claim they were warnings against the sin of lust. Others believe they were used as protection from the devil, who, according to some traditional beliefs, cannot bear the sight of a woman's genitalia. However, there's folkloric evidence that Sheela Na Gig statues weren't cautionary, grotesque symbols, but instead erected as symbols of fertility. At least some Sheela Na Gigs were given to women in labor, and others, like the one in Oxford at the Church of St. Michael at the North Gate, were shown to brides on their wedding day. But whatever the roots of the Sheela Na Gigs were, they're now viewed as symbols of empowerment. In 1992, English alternative songwriter PJ Harvey released a single titled Sheela Na Gig, and in 2021, modern Sheela Na Gig statues were placed at sites in Dublin deemed significant to women's struggles. There's fertility, and then there's just having fun. And Xochipilli was a god all about that sweet, sweet pleasure. And no one knows more about having fun than a gigolo. In Mesoamerica, Xochipilli was known as the Prince of Flowers, and was considered the manifestation of the sun god. Xochipilli was celebrated as the god of all things pleasurable, like summer, flowers, love, dancing, painting, psychedelic plants, homosexuality, and male prostitutes. What? Like the Sheela Na Gig, little is actually known about Xochipilli, but much of what scholars hypothesize about him comes from the 19th century discovery of his statue. The symbolism on the statue and the context of what we know about Aztec culture led many scholars to regard him as a playful, mischievous, and carefree god. Viewing Xochipilli through the lens of a deity of diverse pleasures, along with the transcendent nature of the plants his statue represents, and the connection to his sister, Xochiquetzal, the goddess of love, fertility, sexuality, and prostitutes, helps explain why he's assigned a much more inclusive concept of love and attraction. Because Xochipilli blurs the lines of conventional pleasure. He's known as the god of gigolos. If you take the pleasure-seeking ethos of Xochipilli, sprinkle in a little rum, cigar smoke, and death, you get Baron Samedi, the Haitian voodoo loa or spirit. Known as the guardian of the underworld, he holds the knowledge of the dead and ushers souls into the afterlife. The first male buried in a cemetery becomes the manifestation of Baron Samedi, and by extension, guardian of the cemetery. Samedi can help you communicate with the dead and ensures that corpses stay underground so they don't turn into zombies. He's known as a lewd yet charismatic character, and often represented as a skeleton wearing formal attire of a top hat and a tailcoat. He jokes and makes fun of people, often about those who take themselves too seriously. And his appetite is enormous. Among his favorite foods are black goat and black roosters. Because of his edgy yet social nature, Baron Samedi is one of the most known Haitian loas. Part of his notoriety comes from Haitian dictator François Duvalier, also known as Papa Doc. Duvalier assumed the style and outlandish behavior of Samedi, which led to a 14-year reign of terror that saw the death of nearly 30,000 people. Samedi has been represented in media from a role in the James Bond movie Live and Let Die to being the inspiration for the 90s WWE wrestler Papa Shango. While a skeleton hanging out in a graveyard in a top hat might sound like the opening to a horror movie, in some voodoo, Samedi is seen as a comforting figure and a reminder not to take life too seriously. It's one thing not to take life too seriously, but hair? That's a different matter altogether. If you're starting to see a little too much hair in the drain, you can turn to the Japanese deity Fujiwara Masayuki. In traditional Japanese culture, hair is serious business. It's a sign of vitality and social status, and even seen as a powerful force that connects us to the gods. According to the shrine of Fujiwara Masayuki, hair is a beautiful natural crown given to us by the god of creation at the highest level of the human body. As you might have guessed, Fujiwara Masayuki is the patron of hair and hairdressers, but the story starts with swords, not scissors. Masayuki's father lost his sword while guarding the treasures of the imperial palace during the reign of Emperor Kameyama. Masayuki accompanied his father on a trip to search for the sword, and in order to make money on their journey, he began doing the hair of the women in the villages they would visit. This is said to be the beginning of the hairdressing profession. For much of the 20th century, Japanese barbers and hairstylists would close their doors on the day of Masayuki's death to pay their respects. Today, the Mikami Shrine celebrates Masayuki. Visitors to the shrine can have a priest cut off a small portion of their hair to leave behind as an offering. Now switching from an offering of hair to a peace offering turned bloody. If you've ever wanted revenge, just say a quick prayer to Saint Olga. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. There are more than 10,000 saints, but few of them are as mean as Saint Olga of Kiev. To be fair, she had plenty of reasons to be upset. Her husband, the Grand Prince Igor I, was brutally murdered in 945 BC when he traveled to the nearby Drevlian tribe to collect their tribute. Instead of paying him, the Drevlians bent down birch tree branches and tied them to Igor's legs, and then they let the tree branches go and flung them back into the air, ripping Prince Igor in half. Adding insult to injury, Prince Mal of the Drevlians sent a group of men to Kiev to convince Olga to marry him. Instead of rejecting the proposal, Olga welcomed the men and promised to honor their arrival. However, as she buttered up her guests, she and her soldiers dug a mass grave. The visiting Drevlians were thrown into the ditch and buried alive. But before the news of the mass murder made it back to the Drevlians, Olga wrote Prince Mal and pretended to accept his wedding proposal. She asked for Mal to send a group of men to escort her to Drevlian. Mal sent the men to Kiev, and when they arrived, Olga offered to let them use the bathhouse to freshen up. Once inside, she locked the doors and burnt down the building with the men inside. Still not satisfied, Olga then traveled to Drevlian herself under the guise of hosting a funeral banquet for her late husband. In a show of good faith, she invited the Drevlian soldiers. Once they were good and drunk, She and her men slaughtered all 5,000 of them. She then laid siege to the Drevlian capital for over a year. Finally, Olga extended an olive branch to the Drevlians. She asked for 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house as a peace offering. Olga had her men tie pieces of highly flammable sulfur to the birds and then set them free. After the birds flew back to their nests in the Drevlian homes, Olga's soldiers lit the houses on fire. Drevlian burned to the ground, and those who tried to escape were murdered or turned into slaves. At this point, you might be wondering, why exactly is Olga a saint? Well, officially, she's the saint of widows and converts, due to her conversion to Christianity that helped spread religion throughout Eastern Europe. However, many people celebrate her as a symbol of justice and vengeance. If you've got a problem, rest assured, there's a god for that. These saints and deities represent parts of life that aren't generally associated with gods, but by applying otherworldly power and wisdom to specific aspects of the human condition, they fulfill something more powerful than an all-knowing, all-seeing Superman-style god. They help usher humans through the small yet profound struggles of everyday life.